Hi everybody, tonight we're going to talk about the money market. We're going to talk about two things. We'll talk about demand for money and we'll talk about money and interest rates. We'll start with talking about the opportunity cost of holding money. We'll talk about the money demand curve and also shifts of the money demand curve. Then within the context of money and interest rates, we'll talk about the equilibrium interest rate. Keep in mind that tonight when we're talking about money, we're talking about M1. So we're talking about cash held by consumers or out in the economy, or demand deposits. Let's talk about the demand for money. Why do people hold money? So why do they hold it in the form of, as I've shown here, checking accounts or in cash? Easy, because they want to buy things. Well, is there an opportunity cost to holding that money? Is there something I'm giving up by having cash in my hand? Absolutely there is. The opportunity cost of holding money is the use of what else I could do with those funds, what else I could do with those assets. Table 28.2 from the from the Krugman book shows rates of return and the federal funds rate from 2007. Now rates are much lower than this now. This is the latest one I could find easily. Notice here 1 month certificates of deposit or otherwise known as CDs are returning 5.3% annually. The federal funds rate, so the rate that banks charge each other, is 5.25%. And look what happened by June of 2008 when the market started to unravel. 2% federal funds rate and a 1 month CD at 2.5%. Compare that to the currency. What am I earning on cash? Zero. So when we talk about the opportunity cost of holding money, it's the cost of what we could have earned had we put it in some other investment. Down at the bottom here, notice short-term rates are simply rates on instruments or financial obligations, excuse me, with less than 1 year in duration. So something like a treasury bill. Long-term rates are rates on instruments with greater than 1 year duration. Another way to think about this, something under 1 year might be a 1 month CD. Something over that might be a 5-year CD, so a longer rate. Let's talk about the money demand curve. Very simply stated, the money demand curve is the relationship between interest rate on the y-axis and the quantity of money demanded, which is on the x-axis. Notice the statement below. A higher interest rate leads to a higher opportunity cost of holding money and reduces the quantity of money demanded. The interest rate on the left-hand column, or on the y-axis, another way to think about that is the rate of interest I could earn on things other than holding money in either a checking account or demand deposit or in cash. So things like CDs, things like other investments on which I could earn a return. Now, like so many of our demand curves, there are factors that shift the money demand curve. There are 4: changes in the aggregate price level, changes in real GDP, changes in technology, and changes in institution. Let's go through all 4. First, changes in the aggregate price level. So all things being held equal, higher prices increase the demand for money and lower prices reduce the demand for money. In fact, the change is proportional. A 20% increase in prices drives the demand for money up 20%. This makes intuitive sense. If prices are going up, then it's going to cost me more to buy things. I'm going to demand more money in order to buy those things. This is happening independent of changes in the interest rate. Second, changes in real GDP. As the economy gets stronger and output increases, real incomes and GDP rise. Well, as real incomes and GDP rise, as we buy more, we will want to hold more money at any given interest rate because we need that money because we are consuming more. Real incomes go up. We remember the relationship between real income and consumption. As our incomes go up, we tend to consume more. So that's what causes shifts. That's why a change in real GDP causes the money demand curve to shift. So an increase in GDP shifts the money curve to the right, the money demand curve to the right, and a decrease would shift it to the left. Changes in technology is the third reason. Advances in IT reduce the demand for money. Well, why is that? Well, it's because advances make it easier for consumers to buy things without having to go and get money. So what kind of advances are we talking about? Well, we're talking about credit cards, things like credit cards and ATMs. With ATMs prevalent and credit cards prevalent, we don't have to walk around with a wad of money in our pockets. If we need money, go down to the ATM, you get 20 bucks rather than carrying 100 in your pocket all the time. Credit cards are the reason that, as I explained in class a few sessions ago, I hardly ever carry cash in my pocket. I just don't need it because I can pay for almost everything with the credit card. Fourth, changes in institutions. This has to do with safety. So more stable banking systems reduce the demand for money because as consumers, we don't feel like we need to hold on to that money, that actual cash, because we feel like it's safe in the bank. So those that don't feel it's safe, or in situations where people don't think the banking system is safe, what do they do with their money? Literally, they'll stick it under a mattress, and that is going to drive an increase in the demand for money because people will want to hold on to it rather than trusting the bank to take care of it. The equilibrium interest rate is where money supply equals money demand, which sounds familiar, supply and demand intersecting. Money supply, so as you can see, is this vertical line, is vertical for two reasons. The first is that the money supply is determined by the Fed and fixed at any given point in time, so that's not going to fluctuate. Second, it's also independent of the interest rate. So the Fed doesn't set money supply simply because of the interest rate. So we could have interest rate fluctuations without necessarily having a fluctuation in the money supply. Now, the Fed's interest in moving interest rates could drive a change in the money supply, but the interest rates themselves are not going to change the money supply itself. So important difference there. So for those two reasons, it's a vertical line. Now let's look at what happens when we get out of equilibrium. So move first up and to the left on the money demand curve. You'll notice point H. At an interest rate of RH, so now above the equilibrium interest rate, money supplied is going to be greater than money demanded. Well, why is that? Quite simply because, remember, the interest rate on the y-axis is the rate of return I can earn on things other than money. So if interest rates go up on things like certificates of deposit, the money supply that's out there, demand deposits and cash, is actually going to be greater than the amount demanded because people are going to want things other than money. They're going to want those higher interest bearing certificates of deposit. Conversely, at an interest rate RL, so now you move down and to the right on the money demand curve to point L, go across to the left and you see that RL, what's going to happen? Money supplied is going to be less than the money demanded. And why is that? Well, that's because below the equilibrium interest rate, think of CDs falling, CD rates falling. Consumers are actually going to have a greater demand for money. They're going to think, well, I may as well hold on to my money. I can't make much more on a CD. And the money supply is actually not going to be sufficient to meet all of the demand for money. That's how equilibrium interest rates are determined, and that's what happens when you move up and to the left or down and to the right on that money demand curve. Okay, that's it for tonight. Have a great night, and I will see you in class tomorrow.